What's up, everybody? Welcome on back to another episode of Dropkicks Joysticks. I am your host, Bloody Bill Vox. It's episode number 29, huh? Nice. We're getting towards number 30. And we got a special episode for 30. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But welcome back, everybody. We're back again. Not a comeback. And I'm just rambling because it's early morning and I'm still sipping on my coffee. But I thank you for tuning in wherever you may be tuning in from, whether it's YouTube or Spotify. If you've missed any of the recent episodes, you can catch up on them anytime in either place. YouTube has gameplay accompanying it. Spotify is just the audio. But either way, you can catch up on the show there. Got a bunch of great stuff planned in the coming weeks. And speaking of, we'll talk about it right now. Next week, I've said that at times we will deviate from the normal script, talking about wrestling video games. And as this episode gets dropped, it's Wednesday, February 28th, and we are just a few days away from the final match of one of the most legendary wrestlers in all of professional wrestling, that man known as Sting. He will have his final match this weekend for AEW at the Revolution pay-per-view at the Greensboro Coliseum. It'll be Sting and Darby Allin defending the AEW Tag Team Championship against the Young Bucks. And so to commemorate that occasion, next week, once his career is, officially in the books, it will be 3 days in the books at that point. We're going to have a special episode dedicated to the career of Sting. I've been watching Sting since 1991. If you tuned into the Christmas episode of this show back in December, you may remember that Sting was the only WCW merchandise that I got during that wrestling Christmas. Sting's always stood out. He's been a favorite of mine going all the way back to when I first started discovering WCW in 1991. You know, he was that face paint, bleach blonde, big muscles, bright colors. Everything that appealed to a kid, right? And then even when he became the Crow character, kind of appealed to that teenage angst and all of that kind of stuff. Sting has just always been a big part of wrestling and a big part of my fandom. So I think it's very proper that next week we dedicate that entire show to Sting. I'm not sure how I will go about the video aspect of it. One thing I was thinking about doing would be to go through all of the various video games that feature Sting, such as the game we're going to talk about today, WCW Superbrawl Wrestling, and maybe do a career retrospect of sorts using video games. So, you know, do Sting versus somebody on the original WCW game, Sting versus somebody from the Super Brawl game, and, you know, kind of work my way through the eras that way. I'm not quite sure how we're going to handle the video aspect, but I do know that next week will be a very fun episode. It'll be a special episode because we'll be talking about Sting and all the fun memories. You know, I only discovered him in 1991, but he had a couple of years of good stuff before that I've since been able to discover thanks to the WWE Network / Peacock and YouTube and tape trading and various DVD releases. So looking very much forward to next week's show. That'll drop on Wednesday, 6 a.m. Eastern. YouTube and Spotify. As this episode drops, we are, 4 days past the Elimination Chamber. Took place on February 24th. I was 5 for 5 in my predictions. The Kabuki Warriors retain their women's tag team championship. We got Becky Lynch and Drew McIntyre solidifying their spots at WrestleMania. We had the tag team championship match in which the Judgment Day retained their titles. And then, of course, in what was a surprise to me, Rhea Ripley and Nia Jax took the main event for Elimination Chamber. I mean, it was a surprise, but it wasn't a surprise. It was Rhea's homecoming. I don't know. I for some reason, I didn't think they'd give them the main event slot. But good move on their part doing it, giving that slot to Rhea. She's definitely earned big stadium show main events. But yeah, 4 days ago, it was a 3 a.m. wake up call for me. Oh boy. But I enjoyed every second of the show. It was a great show from start to finish. Uh, of course, a big noteworthy thing coming out of the event is Cody Rhodes officially challenging The Rock to a one-on-one match anytime, anywhere. Seth Rollins told Cody that there's no one-on-one with the Bloodline, so he's got his back. Could be foreshadowing a tag team match. Could be foreshadowing a tag with a betrayal. Who knows? That story continues to be interesting, and it's certainly playing out a lot better than it seemed like it was going to up front. It certainly seemed like they were just going to go Rock Roman, and Cody's stepping aside because he's a nice guy. Seemed like they were going to give up why Cody made that move, but he never actually got to it, it seemed. And if he did, I didn't catch it because I was doing a live watch along on YouTube, so I was talking during the segment. But he said he was going to answer the why, but I don't think he ever did. So WrestleMania now at this point is 6 weeks away. Lots of fun stuff that could be coming to the card. I mean, we know now Cody and Roman, Seth and Drew. We've got Io and Bailey. We've got Rhea and Becky. Looking like we're going to see Logan Paul defend the U.S. title against Randy Orton or Randy Orton and Kevin Owens. I feel like he's being written out of the equation already, but he's a big part of the Logan Paul story. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there. No clear challenger for Gunther right now. I saw it suggested that we could be moving towards Judgment Day versus the Awesome Truth at WrestleMania. Jimmy versus Jay is a possibility. AJ Styles versus LA Knight is a possibility. That last one there's got to be a little disappointing to LA Knight fans, who probably been reading the rumors recent weeks that he was slated to have a match with Logan Paul at WrestleMania, but all of a sudden, with one brutal attack from AJ Styles, unless Styles comes across a title before WrestleMania, it sure seems like old LA Knight is being pushed further and further away from a championship. But we'll see how all of that plays out. We got 6 weeks until WrestleMania. You never know what could happen. Like I said, lots of fun stuff is on the cards. I'm sure I left out a few matches that I've been speculating and seeing speculated on. But it'll be a good time. I'm very much looking forward to WrestleMania. I look forward to it every year. Whether the creative is good or bad, I think 2 shows every year that I will always be excited for is the Rumble and WrestleMania. And if I had to pick a third, SummerSlam. I'm a big 4 kid. They could go back to just those 4, and I'd be happy. And I don't even expect them to go back to the old classic Survivor Series format, although that would be awesome. Go back to teams of 5 fighting to survive. Teams of 4 going to war. Whatever they want to do. But anyway, that's enough rando talk here. Let's get into the meat. The meat of our plate here today. We had our veggie, we had our starch. Let's get into the meat. And that meat is WCW Superbrawl Wrestling. Released on November 1st, 1994 for the Super Nintendo. Published by FCI, developed by Beam. Never heard of either one of those two. Maybe they've done other games that I've been a part of playing. But yeah, never heard of those guys until this game. And I don't think I've heard of them ever since. In fact, I decided to kind of start... I decided to start kind of not printing out my notes every week like I have been doing. So I'm just utilizing websites. And so I pulled these guys up. It looks like all they did, at least here on this games database, is the WCW games. Maybe they did other stuff, but this is as always, it's a SmackDown Hotel. It's a wrestling-centric site. So they may only list the wrestling games these guys did. Anyway, let's get into the official game description, courtesy of our friends at the SmackDown Hotel. Well, I think they're cool. They don't know who I am. That's all right. You got to credit your sources, right? And I'm just being a weirdo about the whole sounding sad that they don't know who I am. These guys are great. Again, if you're ever looking for wrestling information on just about any game, I mean, I've yet to run into a single game that I've done research for the show that I couldn't use these guys for. It's the SmackDownHotel.com. You can get all of your wrestling history video game wise in short form. Can't share it doesn't have everybody's experiences there. But it covers a lot. You get a lot of stuff here. Some of it is limited, but a lot of these games were limited as well. But it's a good place to go if you want some starter information. And then pro wrestling fandom sites are great. Some fans have put together some good stuff. And while I will not say that Wikipedia is ever good for anything, I will say that uh, Wikipedia is good for links. You go to the bottom, the references, that's where you can go find some good links. Sometimes what's written in the actual sections can be a little murky, but you go to the bottom where they have the references. That's where you can get some good stuff for links anyway. Not always good stuff, I should say. But anyway, official game description. Let's go. Stomp a friend today. How about Vader's power bomb, a ravishing Rick Rude's rude awakening to do the trick? A figure four leg lock by Nature Boy Ric Flair might make you feel good. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat will take you on the ride you won't forget. And Johnny B. Bad's just waiting to get you good. You want to step in the ring shoes of Ron Simmons, Flying Brian, Barry Windham, and Sting? Use the signature moves of the natural Dustin Rhodes? Well, quit dreaming and get in the ring. Wrestle the great ones in individual or tag team action with dozens of classic moves, plus each man's signature moves. It's the most realistic action encounter you'll find this side of the squared circle. These are the guys you watch on television's WCW Pro Wrestling, WCW Main Event, and WCW Worldwide. And Tony Schiavone, America's premier TV wrestling voice, announces every match. Come on, Rick Dogface Gremlin and Scott Steiner are ready to go. About with you and a friend, or you be them. Be 'em all. Give yourself a super brawl. I don't know why I read that like I was doing a commercial. It just happened, man. I read that like I was doing a commercial. Wow. And I realized I was doing it like a commercial as I was reading it. And I was like, well, you got to finish it. You got to keep going. You can't stop. You can't stop. Anyway, uh, nice write up there to get you a little excited uh, for this game. And personally, uh, I've always liked it, and I know it gets dragged a little bit. Like, uh, for example, who said this note? Game Pro was pretty negative about it. They praised a few things related to licensing and digitized images and sound bites because this game features actual sound bites from a lot of the wrestlers and Tony Schiavone, as they noticed. But they said it was stiff animation and mediocre gameplay. Um, Said the stiff animations make it difficult to line a superstar up in order to execute a move, is the quote. In fact, the reviews for this game were particularly not very nice. And for what I could find, there's a lot of 2 out of 5s, 2.5 out of 5s, or if you equate that to the 10 scale, that's 4 and 5s out of 4 and 5 out of 10. Not exactly a highly rated game. But maybe it's the nostalgia feeling at the time because, I discovered WCW in 1991. I don't remember how I discovered WCW. I'm sure it was one of those flipping the channels types of deals because when I first got into wrestling and even in my early childhood, if I saw 4 corners and 3 ropes on a TV screen, I was stopping to see what was going on. That's how I saw Ted DiBiase and some regional footage that had been syndicated on a local channel in my area, and he's using Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. Meanwhile, the same weekend, he's on WWF Superstars as the $1 Million Man. Like, talk about confusing stuff there. But I didn't find the gameplay to be stiff uh, or terrible. I mean, maybe it was a little stiff. Um, but from the moment I picked this game up at a friend's house, I believe his name was Robbie. I feel like his name was Robbie, the friend that I played with, but he had it on his Super Nintendo. Um, and so I was going over. We've been hanging out back and forth at each other's houses, playing Super Nintendo with each other, right? And we both had wrestling games that the other didn't have. I had Royal Rumble. He had Super Brawl Wrestling. And I remember playing that game for the first time with him, and I couldn't wait to get back. So, and even in recent years, I remember a couple of years back, a friend of mine uh, who was a fan of Johnny B. Bad. So we did a full Johnny B. Bad championship run. I think they call it the Ultimate Challenge, where you got to beat everybody else in the game. Because it's not a super deep roster to the point that it would take you forever to beat everybody in the game. But I don't know. I just have fond memories of it. So it was funny to see such critical reviews of this. I mean, and to be fair, it's a Super Nintendo game, and considering what it offered for the modes of play and the roster, we'll talk about both of those back to back now. I'm not quite sure why the reviews were so critical. Like, personally, is it a perfect game or anything like that? But I don't think I would have given it twos. Um, in fact, I probably would have given it more. Like, if we're going on the scale of the five, like I'm seeing a lot of the reviews, I probably would have given this a 3 or a 3.5 out of 5. To be honest with you, or if we're putting that on the 10 scale, that's a 6 or a 7. But our modes of play it's not a ton, but it's still pretty decent. We got singles matches, tag team matches, an 8-man singles tournament. We got a 4-team tag team tournament, and then we got the ultimate challenge where a player must defeat every other wrestler in the game. Um, Different stipulations can be selected for the matches. We can have one fall to a finish, first to 3 falls. We can have time limits. And that looks to be it. I thought I was reading ahead while I was speaking, so that we collided there. I thought this thing about pop-ups was something to do with matches, but we get the referee popping up during the match, animated for counts, and then we've got Tony Schiavone doing commentary of sorts. It's basically sound bites, um, from Tony Schiavone, and then we get sound bites from the wrestlers according to the notes here from the wrestlers on the select screen. Uh, so the modes there. It's not a crazy amount, but you can do a lot with singles matches and tag team matches, and then the ultimate challenge is basically a tower challenge, but you can still do a lot with that. I think, considering that we got, I think the list of guys in this game is 12, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, we got 12 in this game. So in the tag team tournament, you use up 8, singles tournament 8. So you've got enough of a roster here that you could do 12 ultimate challenges, and you're gonna do a different run every time, because it's I mean, you're not gonna do a different run, but you are, because if you're Dustin Rhodes, you've got to beat the other 11. But then the next time, say you're Barry Windham, well, Dustin Rhodes is going to be an opponent, kind of deal. I don't know. But anyway, there we go. We just gave away 2 of the guys on the roster: Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham. The other 10 on this roster are Vader, Ravishing Rick Rude, Ric Flair, Johnny B. Bad, Rick Steiner, Sting, Brian Pillman, Scott Steiner, Ron Simmons, and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. That's a pretty solid roster. And back in this era of games, because they were put out on the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo, we didn't have a lot of memory, we didn't have a lot of space, so you could only do so much with these games. Uh, so WWE and even WCW in their Nintendo and Game Boy offerings, they tend to go with the bigger names. And one thing that is, I think, overlooked about WCW sometimes is they always had a very solid roster. They just didn't have solid storytelling and solid booking and solid management. But I mean, this roster alone, just about everybody on here, no, not just about everybody on here has some sort of major accolade that they have had either in WCW or the WWE. Dustin Rhodes, U.S. champion, tag team champion, intercontinental champion, Vader, world champion, Rick Rude, world champion, Flair, world champion, Johnny B. Bad was a TV and intercontinental champion later as Mark Marrow, Rick Steiner and Scott Steiner, tag teams, U.S., TVs, world titles. For Scott Steiner. Sting, what titles hasn't he won? Brian Pillman, singles titles, tag team titles. Ron Simmons was the first black world heavyweight champion. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, world championships, intercontinental championships, tag team championships. Same thing for Barry Windham, minus the intercontinental title, but I think he was a TV or a US champion. I mean, stars studded here for a roster. So again, going back to these rugged reviews that I was finding for this game, I don't understand them at all. And an interesting thing about this game in the roster is imagine how different it would have been. And I couldn't quite find when this game went into development because uh I wanted to see what I could find um about when it went into development versus when it came out because this time period for uh WCW was a very, very interesting time period because Hogan comes in I think May or June. They announce him by July. He's on pay-per-view. Um, and obviously he's not in the game. Uh, we're also missing out on Savage, some of the other WWE guys that came over that may not have necessarily made the game, but like Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Earthquake, Big Boss Man, and of course they would have been under different names, but could you imagine how differently this game might have performed? Um, how differently this game might have performed in the overall landscape if it had Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage for um if they had Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage to do the branding for, because they were two huge WWE names. Um, it's just interesting to see the roster because it represents WCW at a crossroads between like the pre-Hogan era and the post-Hogan era. And so I got to go back on my review stuff for a second because I was just kind of going through my notes, looking for things to make sure we cover because this game is not tremendously deep or detailed for overall features. I mean, your settings are simple, your roster is simple, your gameplay is simple. Uh, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time yammering on those, but I was reading to kind of make sure that I had covered everything that needs to be covered from a features and roster standpoint, and I incorrectly stated that GamePro gave it a 2 out of 5. A lot of other folks gave it a 2 out of 5. But GamePro, for what I'm finding now, actually gave it a 3.5 out of 5, which makes their review kind of confusing. Like, why were you so critical, but then you basically gave it the equivalent of a 7? Like, I always convert it to the scale of 10. I don't know why. I have no idea why I convert it to the scale of 10, even when they have it on a scale of 5. I'm like, oh, well, that's more like a, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. It's just how my brain works, I guess. But yeah. So anyway, that makes their review a little confusing because I don't know how you can give it a 3.5 out of 5 or a 7 out of 10 and then crap all over it for the animations and mediocre gameplay. Those two things don't seem to go together. Just my observation. But whatever. That's a-okay. It's on them. If they want to give it a 3.5 out of 5 and then dump all over it, that's I guess their prerogative, right? Like, I mean, who am I to fault them for that? That's for them. Oh, here's something that I didn't cover as I was continuing to scroll through my notes here. Everybody gets a finisher, very similar to the WWF Royal Rumble game that had come out earlier in the year. So Barry Windham gets the superplex, but the note says here, actually a delayed vertical suplex. Brian Pillman is the flying sunset flip. Dustin Rhodes uses the bulldog. Johnny B. Bad does the tutti frutti left hook. Flair does the figure four. Rick Rude does the the Rude Awakening, the neck breaker. Rick Steiner does the Steiner line. Ricky Steamboat with the flying body press. Ron Simmons does the power slam. Scott Steiner does the Frankensteiner. Sting with the Scorpion Deathlock. Vader's is the power bomb, but it says actually a running power slam. Forgot about that. How hard would it have been to do a crappy power bomb in this game? Especially if you gave Simmons the power slam and you were able to do, especially if you could do the Frankensteiner. Come on, you could do the Frankensteiner, but you can't do a power bomb for Vader. Do him a dude Vader dirty here. That's all right. So yeah, again, very solid roster, but definitely a case of pre and post Hogan. Like, how different would it have been if maybe this game went into development in late 1994 and only came out in 1995? How different the roster could have looked. And in terms of this roster, the 12 that are presented for the time frame, the only guy that I feel like is missing, that I'm surprised is missing because he was a big part of programming at the time. This one stands out to me. There might be others, but this one definitely stands out. Actually, two of them, Arn Anderson and Stunning Steve Austin. I'm surprised that neither one made the cut in this game. But again, limited space. We're going with our big names. We talked about who all the major stars were in their accolades here. So it's a star-studded roster. It's basic gameplay. Like I said, if I were giving it a score, I'd give it. I guess I'll stand firm and I'll give it a 3 out of 5 or a 6 out of 10. It's not the greatest wrestling game ever, but it's fun in its own way. It's not one that I pick up all the time. In fact, picking it up for this episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks is the first time I've played it since that Johnny B. Bad run that a friend of mine asked me to do on a Twitch stream. I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So it's not like I pick this game up all the time. But at the time, WWE had quite a few games in the market that were, representing them between the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo. Meanwhile, WCW they had licensing challenges and they didn't have those games out there. So to have a game on the Super Nintendo, the only one that was ever released on the Super Nintendo, was really cool. WWE had, but we had Super WrestleMania, we had Royal Rumble, we had Raw, we had WrestleMania, the arcade game. WWE had 4 titles on the Super Nintendo. WCW only had 1. So it was nice to have WCW represented at the time. And so for that reason, it definitely will hold a place, a fond place. And I'll look back on it fondly. Like if you look on Google, you'll see, oh, one of the worst wrestling games ever, or among the 8 worst wrestling games ever. I don't really like to do those types of lists, and I dabble with the idea of doing lists, but not rankings, because I hate rankings. But a list of like, okay, in no particular order, these are my 10 least favorites, kind of deal. But I don't agree that this necessarily would be among the worst. I've played some pretty bum wrestling games. I mean, if you want to see bum wrestling games, most every title that came out on the Nintendo was garbage. The WCW games sucked. The WWF games sucked. Uh, to me, they only started getting playable, maybe manageable around King of the Ring. So that was like the 4th or 5th WWF title on the Nintendo. You want to see some bad wrestling games, go do that. Or Extreme Wrestling, which was a PlayStation 4 indie title, one of the worst wrestling games I've ever played. We're going to talk about it in a few episodes, but there's Retromania Wrestling. To me, that makes the list because it promised a whole bunch and delivered none of it. In fact, last week, they finally dropped DLC they promised almost 3 years ago. But WCW Superbrawl Wrestling doesn't make that cut for me. It's not among the worst wrestling games. And granted, like I said, I've never sat down and done a list, and I probably never will. But when I look at this one, I say, nice challenge. Could be better. Love the 3/4 overhead perspective. Apparently, that's the perspective it is. I was going to just call it overhead, but it's not quite overhead because it is a little tilt. Um, Solid roster, enough gameplay. Could it have had like, say, I don't know, a steel cage match? Yeah, sure, but that wasn't really common in that time, and certainly wasn't missed. It's not like I sat there wishing for these types of matches because we didn't know them really possible yet. Like WrestleMania Steel Cage Challenge was definitely a thing, but I don't know. It didn't make you expect it. Because that game was called Steel Cage Challenge. It was like, oh, okay, that's why the Steel Cage match is there. They focused on that match for it. I don't know. But yeah, WCW Super Brawl Wrestling, 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5, whatever you want, whatever scale you want to put it on. Um, I'm not quite sure what it's selling for these days. The last time I saw it, it seemed to be one of those ones that gets a weird price. Like, let's do a quick eBay search right here while we're recording, getting ready to wrap things up here. See what people are selling it for. That doesn't mean what it's worth, but let's see what people are selling it for these days. So let's see. We got somebody out of Canada selling the cartridge and the manual for $75. We got another person who's got the whole box. So if you want a nice complete copy, or no, almost complete, missing the manual, $104. Another copy out of Canada, $75. Cartridge only from Canada, $40. Within the United States, we've got $45, $46, $55, $50, $40. Let's see. This is complete in box, $130. So it seems to, let's call it, range between 40 to a buck 50, depending on what style you want. If you want just the cartridge, you want the cartridge and manual, you want the whole damn thing. So yeah, for those prices, I certainly wouldn't recommend you go out there and grab it unless it's something that you're into collection wise and all of that kind of thing. Uh, uh, Hell, I'm into collecting things physically, and that'll be one that would wait. I'll take care of the 5, 10, $15 games for now, and there's still plenty that I have, like, for consoles I don't even have. Like, I'll never own the Xbox, but I want to buy the WWE games that were released on the Xbox, and I don't need to have every game across all the platforms, like SmackDown versus Raws, for example. As long as I have one, I'm good. But there were console exclusives, and the Xbox did get some of those. But anyway, Super Brawl Wrestling ranging between 40, like the cartridges, it seemed to be between 40 and 60 for just the cartridge. No, thank you. Yeah, that's rough. I would not go out there and pay 40 to 60 bucks. That's a bit much. Fun game, but not worth 40 to 60. I'm happy that I didn't spend that on that game for a copy. Wow. That's crazy. But on that note, my friends, we're going to go ahead and wrap this episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks up. I told you I wasn't going to yammer. I just wanted to talk about the game itself and the features and the guys that were in the game and how it could have been a little bit different if this game had come out in 1995 instead of 1994, and we had Hogan and Savage and some of those other WWE guys to kind of cross brand. Eric Bischoff has said that licensing started to get a lot easier once they had Hogan on board. Could promotions been a little bit different with Hogan on board for a WCW video game? I mean, he or Savage wouldn't hit the video games, as far as I know, until WCW versus the World. One of those fun what ifs of the wrestling games. But again, like I said, I enjoyed it. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. But for the price it's going for on the aftermarket, I would not rush out and buy it unless you are a physical collector like me and you need to have it to complete something. Then go ahead and grab it. You're going to do it anyway, no matter what the price is. You're going to watch and you're going to wait for the price you like. But if you're just looking to play it, find a friend, find a way. But I wouldn't spend 40 to 60 bucks just to play it. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Officially, we're going to wrap it up and get on out of here for this week's episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do so at Bloody Bill Vox. As I always like to tell you, if you're wondering if I'm on a platform, just search that handle at Bloody Bill Vox. And if I pop up, I'm there. And if I don't, I probably won't be. And as I said at the top of the show, next week will be a special edition. We will not be covering a wrestling video game, but we'll be having a career retrospect on Sting. Just a few days away from his retirement as this episode drops this Sunday on pay-per-view. AEW Revolution, Sting and Darby Allin against the Young Bucks for the AEW Tag Team Championship. We'll talk about the match, we'll talk about his career, and I think we'll represent it on the YouTube side with various video games. And we'll start at the beginning with WCW on WCW Wrestling on the Nintendo, and we'll just do various Sting matches all throughout the episode. But until that time, my friends, hope you all have a good week out there. Have fun out there, stay safe out there, be happy out there, because that's really all you can do. Try to do those 3 things for the upcoming week, and then come on back next week as we take a look back at the career of Sting and another brand new episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. Thanks for listening and watching. All right.